and good evening. I am your host, Jason Miles, and welcome to another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, please hit like, hit subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell as we're adding new shows and cross streams constantly. Just yesterday, we did kind of an impromptu Monday show with good friend of show, friend in real life, Coach William Liu, one of the basketball coaches at Oakland High, and another friend of show, Wozni Lambre. Sadly, I was not able to do all of the Haitian hello stuff that Pascal does whenever there's a Haitian guest on, but Wozni definitely felt welcome. We had a great discussion. First, of course, about the NBA world champion, Golden State Warriors. Of course, we had to discuss that. Kind of the changing of the game in this new era. And then we got into what the real discussion was, what I wanted to be about, which was the gentrification of youth athletics and what is the potential future if we keep going down this route of what capitalism will do to youth athletics. It kind of ended on a bit of a somber note, but fun nonetheless. Also, please do not forget that June 26th, this Sunday, we're going to be live and in person in Brooklyn at Project Parlor. It's an event in conjunction with Sublation Media. Ben Burgess will be there. Norm Finkelstein will be there. Margaret Kimberly of Black Agenda Report will be there. And I just found out Sean KB from the Antifada program, which we've done some cross streams with, will be there on a panel as well. It's free, people, so there's no excuse for you not to show up. We can meet and build. And if you guys are unaware, my co-host Pascal Robert was on Brianna Joy Gray's show recently. I believe he just did an episode of Crystal Ball's show as well. I was recently on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar, as well as Diet Soap with Doug Lane. So please be sure to check all that fun stuff out. So let's bring in my homie, my co-host, my dog. He is the Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles. I want to say thank you, everyone, for following my appearance on Bad Faith Podcast with Brianna Joy Gray. That was last week. I will be appearing on the 30th, I believe it's scheduled, with Crystal Ball on her podcast with Kyle Kalinske. I don't know if it's actually video or just audio, but I was connected with them, and they're interested in having me on. Please also go check out my man Jason Miles on the Majority Report, talking all about his actually it's his third, I believe, video essay, maybe even fourth.
No, it's way more. We have like 7 or 8.
Okay,
there's a lot.
Counted. Well, this was the one that really stuck out of my mind. Same as it ever was, talking about Black popular culture in the post-civil rights era. Please come check us out this weekend in Brooklyn.
Also, I don't know why we keep forgetting to say this. Every Monday, Pascal and I do David Feldman's show, and this past Monday he wanted to break it up a little bit. So that was actually a very interesting conversation that we had that kind of is going to dovetail a little bit into what we're talking about, definitely with the 13th Amendment, and somehow he wanted to talk about January 6th, and it was Pascal even said, Jason gets a very visceral reaction when you bring these things up.
I know my host Jason well, and I was correct in saying that. But yeah, that was an interesting hodgepodge of subject matter that we talked about on David Feldman. Check out yesterday's David Feldman if you can as well. That was a really great conversation we had about a variety of things, some of them touching what we're talking about today. But besides that, how are you, brother Jason Miles?
I'm feeling all right. We got the show going. We have our favorite moderator / faceless voice, M. Toussaint.
Hello, everyone.
How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right because I just found out some very good news, which is that someone in the chat posted, a few people posted, we are now at 10K subs.
We are.
Yes, I was aware of that for a couple of days now. That's correct.
My
Nice.
daughter sent me a message. I told her she should watch the show today. And she sent me a message and she said, "Oh, I saw you hit 10,000 on Father's Day." And I was this close to
Oh,
responding. That doesn't give you an excuse why you didn't call on Father's
ooh, this is a
Oh.
call out.
Day. So you take that. You may be my
You
favorite,
don't do that when your dad has a show.
right? You may be my favorite
Yeah.
oldest daughter. But I was hurt, man. I was
She's my
looking at
favorite oldest daughter of yours, too.
she's a pretty badass oldest daughter, but I definitely was watching the phone, um, like a girl waiting for the prom call, and I didn't get it, and so now
Oh,
someone said that daughters are canceled. Yes,
all of them.
all daughters canceled, from the legitimate to the illegitimate. Daughters canceled,
Nice.
and if you know me personally, you know how funny the joke actually is.
Word.
Someone says, "Jason, remember when her birthday comes up?" That's fine. I'm poor, so anything she gets, she's like, "Oh, thanks for the card."
Thanks for the can of beans, Dad.
I know. Thanks for supersizing my McDonald's, Dad. Well, let's bring in our guest, the man of the evening. I hit up. Well, first of all, Bertram's been on the show before a few times, and we were first made aware of Bertram when he wrote a great piece that I kind of referred to actually for the last video essay. Who gets to speak for Black people in the culture industry? And he wrote it in Current Affairs. It was shared around our group of friends quite a bit. So we got to have Bertrand on with Teray, and then he came back. We did the Bill Cosby video essay. He got to come back for that one, which was actually a really good one. But I don't know if he sent it to me, but I had already seen it. This cat got into it, Pascal, with Sandy Darity on Twitter.
Bertrand?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why we're doing this show. This fool was getting into a Sandy Darity, and he was calling him out on Twitter, and Darity responded.
What was Darity troll?
Well, let's just bring this gentleman in. It's everyone's favorite light-skinned dude from Southern California, Bertrand Cooper.
I need that on a business card. Everyone's favorite light-skinned dude. All right.
From SoCal, you got to make sure.
Jason, Pascal, how are you?
What's going on, bro? I did not know that today's subject matter was sparked by a little Twitter conflagration you had with Dr. William Sandy Darity.
It was, yeah, and it was unexpected too because it seemed like it was a series of shoulder tapping happening on two different sides. Where a friend of mine mentioned my work in USA Today. He got a column there, John Wood Jr. Somebody didn't like his reading of the stats, so John calls me in, and as I am basically standing up for that interpretation, Darity's name comes up, and I'm not expecting Darity to actually show up or anything like that. I wasn't even trying to call him out. We were just referencing his work. But then Sandy showed up, and I got to, ask him a question more or less that I'd wanted to ask him for a long time, which is, I'm assuming, everybody knows the racial wealth gap and pretty much how that formula is delivered to folks. But you split up white and Black folks into income quintiles. That gives you 5 groups. And if you take any one of these groups, you compare white people and Black people earning the same income, the median wealth favors white folks, where they often have 2 to 3 times the difference than people in their same class. But the big picture is that the overall white median wealth is normally around 10 times or more what it is for the Black wealth. What I wanted to ask him though was, and I like to use the famous graphs. I don't want to come up with my own graphs because then people will accuse me of fucking up the numbers. So I like to use other people's graphs. So using the same graph that Sandy uses, to illustrate the interracial gap, you can see all of these black gaps. And I asked him, why does he never offer a similar formula where he
About
said,
the internal racial wealth gap within Black people, about the
Within
fact
Black
that the top, that 75% of Black wealth is controlled by something like the top tier of Black elites, like the top 10% of Black families, and why he never talks about that.
and why he never puts it in really, really simple terms. What actually happened, or what had happened in the tweets, was that he said that he's never denied that intraracial. He's never denied that Black class disparity exists. But there's a real difference between not denying something and offering the stats in a way that folks can digest. And I asked him why he never does this simple multiplication, but on the Black side, and he said it would be misleading. To quote him, it would be misleading to do the Black on Black comparison when the overall racial wealth is so low. And that, having been poor, this stuck a real core with me, because just, to run through it real quickly, the big number for me is that Black folks in the top 20%, so this is going to be your incomes over $100,000 in today's number, they have, compared to the bottom 20% of Black folks, 1,380 times the median wealth. It's a huge gap. Compared to white folks, the gap on the Black side is 66 times larger. But the gap on the white side, something that you alluded to in your piece on the racial wealth gap, Pascal, that gap is considered serious enough to be part of what powered Occupy Wall Street, what powered some of the class sentiment behind Bernie Sanders, what in its own distorted way powered, some of the class sentiments behind Trump. It undergirds the whole conversation. On the Black side, a gap between the top and bottom that is 66 times larger than the white side. Apparently, even mentioning that is misleading.
Let me tell you something. Let me tell you why this is a great. Bertrand, you have not disappointed me. You came out the gate with the shooting sparks. Do you know why this is important? Because it proves something that is very, very, very prescient. That viewing Black people as a collective community is only useful when you can leverage it against whites for grievance. But it's not useful when you're comparing how Black people are using their wealth and being compared with other Black people within their group. In other words, we'll talk about each other as a community as long as we're comparing to how white people are, quote unquote, doing compared to us, or doing, quote unquote, to us, if you will. But we won't talk. We don't want to concentrate on the community when the community so-called wealth is disproportionately over 75% in the top 10% of Black families.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, this statistic, people who've been paying attention for, I'll say, the last decade or so, there is a suite of statistics that have all been used to basically promote this idea that all Black folks are having the same experience. And since they're all having the same experience, you can have these sort of race brokers who can do race relations. You can pick one Negro leader who will be, attuned to the needs of all the other Black people, because in essence, we're all going through the same ordeal. There's been a few things that have been used to express that, but this emphasis on the median wealth, a race-wide measure, that's been just one of the go-to ones for suggesting that all Black folks are in a similar economic experience. And it's a really weird form of dissonance for me, because we love to say that not all Black folks are poor. We love to chastise people who make that mistake. The only reason to point this out is if there's meaningful class differences between Black people. Otherwise, they might as well all be poor. And, going back to Doherty's work, he's got a report in 2015 called Umbrellas Don't Make It Rain. At that time, the median wealth for the entire race of Black people was $7,113. But as a range gets wider, knowing the middle of that range tells you less and less about people on either side of it. So if we, at that time went to the bottom, the bottom 20% of Black folks, they had 1.5% of the race-wide wealth. The race-wide median was 7,000 and some change. The median for the Black bottom 20% was $100. If you went up to the next quintile, these are folks that are bottom of working class. Some people call them the lower middle. They're teetering on the edge of poverty, depending on family size. They are in federal poverty. They were at half of the race-wide median. So the first two groups of Black folks are at a fraction of what this race-wide median is conveying. And the bottom Black folks, they have 1/70th of the race-wide median. Then you get to the third quintile. In our dollars, this would be, folks making between $45,000 to $65,000 a year. This is really normally considered like the middle. They have double the race-wide median. They're at about $14,000 in wealth, 140 times what we're seeing as the median for the bottom 20% of Black folks. You go to Q4, we're in upper middle territory. This is folks between $74,000, $94,000. This is where we're going to get most of the college Black folks that I reference so often. And they have 6 times the Black median. They're at around $42,000 in wealth, 420 times more than the bottom Black 20%. And then finally you get to Q5, the top 20% of Black Americans, folks in our dollars who are earning over $100,000 a year. And they have 20 times the race-wide median. They're working with about $140,000 in wealth, and they're at 1,380 times the wealth of the bottom 20%. This is all in Darity's graphs. This information has been updated, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago, but you were still in the 1,300 times greater range. And considering how income, wealth dictates my ability to, maneuver through any of these initiatives that say Harvard wants more Black students or HBO wants more Black writers, my income and my wealth dictate my ability to really take advantage of any of these things. So to not mention these differences and to not take note of the fact that lay people are interpreting the race-wide median as something you can use to get a sense of what most Black folks' economic life is like, I don't understand how this isn't a part of the conversation. I don't understand how it's not.
Doesn't Darity and the people that love having this racial wealth gap discourse love to add the fact that when you take that percentage that you're mentioning, the top end of Black wealth, it still pales in comparison to the top end of white wealth. And that becomes their justification to say, well, even though these Black people may be more well off than the lower end, they still aren't as well off as the top end white.
Well, yeah, they do love to say that. And it's something you only get away with when you're talking about Black folks, and specifically when you're doing a race-wide comparison. Because let's switch it to, if I were to point out, say that Hispanic women are earning less on the dollar than Hispanic men, your response to me could not be, yeah, but Hispanic men are making less than white folks, so we're all in this together. That would be ridiculous. No one would accept that at this point in time. But for some reason, in this Black-white discussion, you can get away with that.
Well, the reason why you can get away with that in this Black-white discussion is because all discussions about race in the United States for over a century, as Jason knows, as we've talked about this several times, particularly with sociologist Zine Magubane, are shaped and framed around the concept of race relations, meaning that Black people are not individuals in America. They are a coherent group of individuals in one body that must be related to white people, and everything about them must be as a one whole group be related to white people. So it's not about how individual Black people function in American society. It's about how they relate to whites collectively, so that selective individuals like Sandy Darity, like other people that he's worked with, can be chosen as the racial ventriloquist of the hour or the moment or the day or the minute to broker out what is acceptable policy. And I'm sure you probably come to the conclusion by now, Bertrand, that it's not an accident that this racial reductionist, myopic fetishization of the racial wealth gap. By the way, I haven't found anyone who's shocked or remotely surprised that Black people have less wealth than white people. I don't know how that statistic is surprising when up until the 1960s, over 60% of Black labor were domestic workers or sharecroppers working in plantations picking cotton. How it's shocking to people that today there's a significant racial wealth gap is beyond me. But what is particularly noxious is that this discourse comes about at a time where, with the rise of Occupy, as you mentioned, with the rise of Bernie Sanders, you have even white people who were for so long deluded to believe capitalism was a silver bullet to their problems, for the first time challenging capitalism and demanding class-wide remedies. And if we think it's an accident that the ruling class and people like the Brookings Institute are pushing racial wealth gap, racial grievance discourse at a time when we realize that having Black people revert back to their socialist inclinations would be destabilizing for the ruling class. If we think that's an accident, I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you.
Well, I found this quote. Let me find this quote. I want to read you guys this.
While he finds that, I just want to say I would love to get race ventriloquy or ventriloquism in circulation. I loved when you said it, Pascal. I've seen Adolph Reed Jr. say it. I'm a fan of that phrase. It really sums it up.
I want to know what you guys feel about this quote. This quote was posted a few days ago in a Facebook group that I believe was started. Negro is the touchstone of the modern democratic idea. The presence of democracy to the proof and reveals the falsity of it. Take the Declaration of Independence, for instance. That seemed a splendid truth, but the Black man merely touched it and it became a splendid lie. And in this matter, or the suffrage in the southern states, it is expedient to keep the Negro a serf politically because he is still largely an economic serf. If he should attain political freedom, he would free himself from industrial exploitation and contempt. Of course, such a revolution is startling even to think of. That quote is from Hubert Harrison in 1911. Is that quote still relevant today?
I don't think that it's the same situation it is today, because one of the problems I have with the way in which we elevate the quotes from individuals from the past, whether it's James Baldwin or Hubert Harrison, is that these guys were living under an apartheid Jim Crow regime in American society. We have now been into a position where we literally have over 10,000 to 15,000 Black elected officials who are governing over the condition of Black people in municipalities throughout the country. We've had a Black political class for over 50 years who are firmly integrated into their role as being emissaries of the ruling class. And to believe that the same way in which Blackness is rendered to redundancy in the early 20th century is the same as today is erroneous. Is it rendered to redundancy? Yes, but it's much more of a class issue than exclusively a racial issue. But because as we know, we talked about on the show, we use racial democracy as the vector for which we would increase the participation of Black people in capitalism during the civil rights movement instead of social democracy, which basically means we went with race-first remedies, affirmative action, minority set-asides, and things of that nature, instead of class-based remedies, as Preston Smith talks about in his book. What ends up happening is that it always gives benefit to elite Blacks. The same reason why the civil rights movement increases and improves the condition for Blacks who are proximate to the middle class or Blacks who are proximate to the upper middle class is the same reason why programs like reparations, why minority set-aside contracts, why buy first, Black capitalism are going to help that same class of people. And it's the same reason why reparations ends up being a wealth transfer to the Black political class and their class acolytes.
So, I tend to agree with the fact that when we go back to the past and we're living, Pascal referenced it earlier. There's a period of time in the past when, prior to 1955, I think that's as far back as the, more recent census poverty report goes. From that year prior, more than half of Black folks were living in poverty. Mm-hmm. And you had basically, if you picked out of any two Black people at random, you were going to get one who was in poverty. And you still kind of have this, Pascal says it great. You have this whole political process built out of having race relations where one person gets to speak for all the Black folks. And at different times, we see people doing things to keep this as, the dominant system. One way is to go through, race-wide meetings and make sure it seems like all Black folks are basically in the same class. I mean, here's the thing. It's pretty clear what it would take to have democracy, you would need participation of the greatest number of Black folks. Right now, we have a system that basically says, okay, Black folks at the bottom are disenfranchised. You know what's a great solution? Let's ask Ibram X. Kendi what he thinks.
Well, let me. Okay, go ahead. Sir.
And I don't pick on him like harmlessly. He's received money from Jack Dorsey over Twitter. He's received, I want to say it was something in the ballpark of $15 million to continue doing his research. He gets to speak as the Black, basically Black consciousness on a lot of these points. You could do any number of things to increase, how do I put it, the democratic participation of Black folks at the bottom and elsewhere. There really isn't much drive to do it. Everything seems to be about brokering with different thought leaders in the Black community.
When is the last time either of you have anyone say we need to have a working class black politics, or we need to have a black politics rooted in working class issues?
Well, that kind of defeats Black excellence, right? Because Black excellence isn't working class. Black excellence is kind of bourgeois. It's a bourgeois project. So
it's completely a bourgeois project.
But I wanted to add this to the whole discussion, because this is what I'm starting to see in this era of a lot of hopeful socialist defeats politically. There seems to be almost a strategic win by the Democratic Party in placing Black females in positions of power, and even taking the intersectional route, like Black queer females, Black queer ethnic diasporic females in positions of power, to silence these voices that are actually to the left when it comes to public goods governance. And I've been saying it over and over. You definitely saw it with originally, I think Pascal wrote about this, Hillary Clinton talking about, ending student debt. What was her comment about ending student debt won't stop racism?
Nationalizing the banks won't end racism.
Yeah, nationalizing the banks won't end racism. And then you see it again with BLM, bum rushing Bernie Sanders during his first run. And then the discourse around reparations. And I know we're a little bit older than you, Bertrand, but I think you're old enough to have voted in the one of the Barack Obama elections. Yeah. And I never remember hearing any sort of discourse around reparations to the point where it was like killing a campaign. So we're starting to see anti-racism or race relations or intersectionality become the tool that really neutralizes, I think, public goods policies. Do you guys agree with that?
Jason, listen, you're beyond right on the money, bro. You're beyond right on the money. Listen, let's make this abundantly clear. The American ruling class after the Obama presidency sees the rise of Bernie Sanders. The owners of the means of production are seeing kids who are coming out of elite colleges, who normally would be expected to go to finance capital for employment, talking about they proudly claim themselves to be socialists. After 8 years of socially engineering Black people to believe in a Wall Street Manchurian candidate as the embodiment of what Black politics should be, if it became popular within the consciousness of that same Black body politic to accept socialism as a political option, do we really think that the American political establishment will be willing to allow that to be integrated into the minds of Black folk as a real political option to the two-party system? It would be beyond a threat. Think about how much of a threat Sanders was already with the support he had at the time. And I'm not trying to say to romanticize him. The American media establishment, every element of the American politics was focused on neutralizing his effectiveness as much as possible. So I don't think there's no question that making that politics as undesirable as possible in black spaces was a significant part of the equation.
I find that, you know, everything that seems to happen in the mainstream of black political discourse, these different actors, the race brokers, people who are, leading, I'll say, the dominant stream of the woke or anti-racist streams of thought, they operate within the current power structure. They operate within it. They have, to, Pascal's point, they could take themselves out. They could all, well, I'm not sure they would be successful, but they have the option to use their political leverage to try and bring in more black voices. They typically do not do that. They operate within the white power structure. I mean, to even function, they have to decide that there's some group of white elites that they can curry favor with, and that they can, use their favor with those folks to, I don't know, in their minds, maybe get certain improve access to, say, Harvard or other spaces that are desirable. I mean, a lot of times this just feels like trying to gain more cultural turf for the black, like middle and upper middle class, but within the same system that we currently have. When you look at, if you were to ask a lot of people, it feels like there's all this progress that has been made in terms of different cultural spaces for black folks, mostly because, the drum I'm always banging, middle class, or the appearance of more middle-class black folks in popular culture and movies and film and all that. If you were to think about it over the last 10 years, it feels like there's been a lot of interest from white folks in trying to spend their empathy on these different black causes. If you're mostly concerned with the black bottom, though, you can look up the U.S. Census report, and in 2020, 9 million black folks were living below the poverty line. In 2000, it was 8 million. In 1988, the year I was born, it was 9.3 million. And at the same time that basically the black population in poverty has been flat for the last few years, Harvard has had perfect representation among black students. None of the incoming ones have been from poverty. There's more black folks on every area of popular culture. They all come through college, which is still very, very classist. So where has all this empathy, all this political leverage been spent? It seems to be getting spent on improving access to the power structures that already exist for people who are black, middle, and upper class. It just increasingly improves their ability to do what well-off white folks have done. And at the same time, it allows like white Democrats to, even though they go to Harvard, they go to Yale, they go to all the same places as their white Republican peers, they get to side with those groups that you listed, Jason, a second ago, and say like, yeah, but we're a lot cooler than those other fuckers over there because we're with, these black women who are running said and said show. But there's no change for the black poor.
Yeah, I want to stay kind of in the cultural arena with this super chat. Thank you very much, Razorleaf, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. And I do, before I even read the super chat, I want to let people know. Sorry, I forgot this on the beginning of the show. Our Thursday show, before we really get rocking and rolling on it, we're going to do our first fundraiser. A friend of mine reached out to me that her cousin's classroom needed help raising money so they can have just basic materials for the classroom. So we're going to try to do a little bit of a fundraiser for Perry's Elementary School in my hometown of Richmond, California. But that being said, let's read this super chat. So it is no accident that we see the media dramatize Black Wall Street, Watchmen, etc. as a historic trauma. What a spectacle. I think if you look at it, the problem, and I don't want to say it's a conspiracy and you get the tinfoil hat on. It's easier to make certain projects, right? Robert Townsend definitely made a movie about A. Philip Randolph and unionizing the sleeping car porters, but it was a made for HBO movie and it didn't do very well, and socialism is kept at a little bit of a minimum. And it was also made before Obama's president. I think it's made in 2005. This is made during the Bush years, which is even more kind of interesting that he was able to make that. But when you look at someone like Ava DuVernay, she's not making anything that's very jarring to the power structure, right? Even with 13th, that's not very jarring to the power structure because it's got people kind of looking in the wrong direction. And I can't blame all that on her. A lot of that movie was based off Michelle Alexander's book. But the last thing that she did that I saw was When They See Us, which is based on the 1989 Central Park 5 case, which is very sad and definitely tugs at the heartstrings, and it's moving, and you know, Ava can put a good picture together. But between that, Selma, you know, it's just racial grievance, because there's something about that where, I hate to say it, and we've talked to Professor Kelly Dietz about this, there is a kind of a sick obsession with Black suffering.
You know, there is a lot of times I get bogged down in these discussions about whether or not I'm being a race reductionist or whatnot, or if I'm not giving enough room for race in certain class conversations. What doesn't come up a lot of times, you know, and this is great coming off of Michelle Alexander's book, is that there's a priority in terms of certain traumas. One of them is incarceration. Another is, you know, being on the wrong side of police violence. Those are the traumas that really are the best at engaging public sympathies, because they are just so horrifying. As it so happens, you take something like incarceration and you go to the Prison Policy Institute, and you find out that around, you know, 8 out of every 10 prisoners was in poverty prior to going to prison. And because I'm interested in these key issues of, say, incarceration, in police violence, in concentrated poverty, in unemployment, the reason I don't give that much space to just like a race lens is because you take incarceration, 80% of the prisoners are being harvested from one class of Black folks. It's kind of hard to reduce the role of class in that. But we have to fight over who has access to these traumas, because they legitimize whether or not you get to speak for Black folks. There's a whole list of things that, you know, Black people in the middle and upper classes are experiencing in work environments that the Black poor never get to enter. And I'm not trying to, you know, engage in like which is worse, whatever, but I do think it's not, you know, uncontroversial to say that microaggressions don't really hold up in the public mind against wrongful shootings that they hand to police. And because we have to fight tooth and nail over who has access to that trauma to gain authenticity, to be head Negro who has the most real Black experience so that you can talk to all the white people, well, then you have to minimize class, and you have to make it so that class has no connection to who experiences these. You got to make incarceration, all these other traumas, kind of just like a floating miasma that can strike Black people at random with no concern for income. And, you know, think about so it is really hard for me to imagine how anyone can like pitch any sort of socialism, any sort of working class movement when, you know, we don't want to acknowledge the class position of white folks, and we don't want to acknowledge white folks at the bottom. And I think about these movies that dramatize Black trauma, and there's always, you know, it's really the focus of all Black people are affected by this equally, keeping up the idea that any of us can speak for any one of us, and kind of cutting out any harm that's done to white folks at the bottom. So even if a movie doesn't come off as saying class doesn't matter at all, it's just like, it's not a jumping off point for a socialist movement or a working class movement if you can't acknowledge the suffering of like white poor folks. But if I even mention that, I start hearing about how white poverty is not the same as Black poverty.
It's not, man. Have you ever seen Different Strokes?
Oh my God.
It's different poverty, man. It's just different poverty. Philip Drummond actually was a poor white person on that show. It's trying to show white poverty.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm going to take the L on this argument long term, and there's going to be something unique about having white skin and not enough money for food versus having black skin and not enough money for food. Maybe
Well,
that's
I mean, ultimately, the purpose of this whole kind of bifurcation of poverty is to make it seem like, listen, because the Negroes have this special poverty, we have to give them special remedies that we know that white people will reject anyway, because we're not really trying to solve their problems anyway. We're not trying to solve poverty for anyone. What we're trying to do is manage the fact that the perception of poverty is racialized, so we can do nothing about it. In other words, we keep the charade of actually trying to address the poverty going, while we want to do nothing about poverty for anyone. So it's a convenient way to keep this whole kind of con game going over and over and over again.
Someone says Bertram is a happier, younger Pascal. I would add that Bertram is actually less happy than Pascal. And actually, Bertram is like the younger, more fiery, soon-to-be curmudgeon.
I mean, these all sound like great futures. I mean, even to put people in the same category as Pascal on some temporal line, I got to be doing something right. So I'm happy about that.
Oh wow! I'm very honored that you would make such kind statements about me and my work, Bertrand. Because I've always I see hope in the future when young people like you realize the con and cut right through it.
Pascal, there's a question right now about the Kerner Commission report. Someone's asking about what was that report? And it's the Kerner Commission report. Can you talk a little bit about the Kerner Commission report?
The Kerner Commission report was a report issued by Lyndon Johnson in the late 1960s, I believe in 1968, during the urban rebellions. Between 1967 and 1971, there were over 300 urban rebellions that plagued cities throughout America, and the Lyndon Baines Johnson administration was trying to ascertain what were the causes of the rebellions and what were the ways and the means that could be done to neutralize the capacity of them happening again, because the United States was so concerned about these rebellions that they literally thought it was possible that it could be partially a Soviet-conspired plot to have the Russians involved in having them actually take hold. And one of the means by which the Kerner Commission report suggested was to increase the presence of Black people in popular culture, in media, in news, in television, in comedies, in sitcoms, in plays, and all of these places, to basically get Black people to be more vested in seeing their images on the screen, as opposed to wanting to be politically motivated to challenge the state and burn down edifices within their communities.
Isn't this some bastardized version of the same, dumbass deal of psychological wages, being white poor, but getting to be the same skin color as the president? Isn't that dandy for you? Like, I feel all the time that I'm being convinced that I should be accepting the same psychological wages that the boys made fun of. I mean, he didn't make fun of. He thought it really mattered. I'm denigrating it, but like, I can't pay my rent with psychological wages. I can't eat with it. All I can do is have some strange feeling of being better. And I feel like I'm always being pitched the same thing. Like, you're on TV, you're in the culture, it just feels like so thin. I don't know how that's a useful deal for me to just be represented, but not in a better situation economically.
Well, that's the interesting conversation around like this difference between different ethnic groups and what poverty looks like. In my travels around this wonderful rock we live on called Earth, I've never really looked better than the other. I've actually spent too much time in areas because, we forget most Black people live in urban centers. So I've seen urban poverty from the California perspective, from the New York perspective, but I've also seen poverty in the hinterlands of the Virginias and kind of all through the Appalachians. Some of that shit was like, what the fuck? And then in parts of this, people literally living next to open trenches of sewage.
Just on that, and this is for anyone, because this would go off into a tangent for sure, but for anyone listening who wants to dive into this deeper, so much of the argument that's been made over the last few years, and really, again, going back to like just the 2010s period, I'm seeing some of these comments.
No comment, Born Center. No comment.
So much. See, that question made me lose. So much of.
I'll say because this is an audio.
I got it. I'm back.
Okay. Go ahead.
So much of making white poverty different than black poverty all hinge on the word poorer. Almost every report you go back to, it hinges on poorer, not poor, not being in poverty, being poorer than some white person. I'll give an example. A big one that Coates covered a lot was the Jargowski research on being in concentrated poverty, and that black folks were more likely, A, to be in concentrated poverty even when they weren't poor, and B, even when they weren't poor, to live in poorer neighborhoods. First thing, they attacked the poorer neighborhoods. They weren't poor. They were poorer than the white neighborhoods, but they still had a median income that was above the poverty level. It just wasn't at the same level as the white folks. But this was used as a way of saying, oh, see, all the black folks are living close together in the poor centers. The other thing had to do with concentrated poverty. This is one of those sleights of hands where, yes, if you took non-white or non-poor whites, 98% of them did not live in concentrated poor neighborhoods. The black percentage was higher. In that 91 or 92% of non-poor black people didn't live in the ghetto either. But that percentage difference, if you don't give the numbers like I did, you can say, oh, black folks live in the ghetto despite income at rates that are 3, 4, 5 times higher. But we're talking about single digit differences. And they did the same thing with neighborhoods. And this was all part of a push to make this idea that white poverty was somehow loftier and better than black poverty. And it really hinges on this idea of being poorer than a white person being made equal to the federal poverty line and below. And that is not the definition of poverty.
You know, it's really interesting because the last thing, because I'm looking at some of the comments in the chat, and it's incredible. Just acknowledging that there can be white people that are poor gets some Negroes to get outraged. It's like, what are you talking about them? They've got everything. Why is there a them? Who is this them? Like, as there's some kind of collective identity of it's all of them versus all of us. They are people of all individual backgrounds who suffer from all different types of social and economic ilks and plagues. So we're so stuck into this race relations nonsense that we think that, oh, you're white, everything is great, you're fine, you're living in in Hollywood, everything's awesome, you got no problems. You're black, oh, you must be in the hood, man, everything's bad. Because we're so stuck into this mentality that of total binaries that we can't possibly believe that individuals have different actual narratives in terms of where their life is.
Something that has been frustrating to me, hopefully it touches on the same point, Pascal, but there's, we have hundreds of years of existential philosophy written mostly by middle and upper class folks exploring all the ways that a life where you're not starving or in poverty or getting your head cracked in by a police officer can still be a wildly unfulfilling, soul-crushing, terrible existence. And I never want to take away from anyone that there's no other ways that your life can be horrible. Poverty just seems to be this really contentious one because it seems to be the one resource that you need to claim to get white sympathy. And it dovetails to me with this. Americans are basically, in our culture, we have to convey all suffering, if we want to convey in public, in economic terms. Unless mental health or philosophy reemerges, until then, an American on average can't say, I have suffered greatly, but they can say, I've worked for everything I had. I didn't have a silver spoon. I've never been given anything freely. And just contemplate for a moment what a wretched existence you are claiming for yourself if no family or friend has ever given you anything of economic value freely. But in order to express any existential angst with your life in the public square without being shamed, you have to shoehorn everything into a narrative about financial strain. So we all have to fight for whose financial strain led to the worst possible life. And it's in part because we just can't use mental health, can't use religion, can't talk about spiritual harm. And I'm not saying that these are frames that one's better than the other, but you want to talk about suffering in the public square, it's got to be a story of financial strain. That's the only way you're allowed to complain about anything.
I think it's. Hi, Bertram, by the way.
Hi.
We've never been like formally introduced because some people are rude. Nice to meet you. I think
Nice to meet
it's poverty you can claim. You can also claim having been in war. And those two things, people,
Fair
you know,
point.
yeah, they'll get out of your way for that.
What did you say about war? Empty Son, I didn't hear the last thing you
Sure.
said.
People will give you a certain amount of respect if you've been in war. Anything to do with war, anything to do with military, even the cops, it's extended to them. Or poverty. That's how you
I
can
actually
claim
don't think
hardship.
people in America give you respect for poverty. I think they try to look at you as an outcast and they blame your problems on yourself.
Only if you're rich can they give you credit for poverty.
Yeah.
Well, if you became rich.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are people who, like Trump, my dad gave me $1 million. That's all I had to get started.
Oh, you know what?
A little loan.
Yeah,
Just a little
It's a
loan.
tiny loan that he
This
didn't
is
pay
tiny
back.
loan.
The concept of, and this is what I mean by having to fit everything into an economic framework. Because all suffering has to happen within this context, that means that we have to treat being rich as this Edenic existence. Like, you're not rich until you have so much money that only acts of like God, cosmic mischief can like befall you. If anything else can reach you, you can claim I'm not rich yet. And that's because none of us want to say, oh, I've reached the point where I can never complain about anything that happens to me. I'm rich there. We really look at like admitting that you're rich or that you're that well off as basically saying you can't have suffering of any kind anymore. We treat it as if it's ridiculous.
No, that's actually good to have so much money. Like, we love watching these sports documentaries where you see these millionaire athletes lose all their money, with a couple bad years of a drug problem. But there's like so many gajillionaires that they're like, dude, I still do drugs. Like, they don't give a damn. You think David Bowie was clean? No.
Are you saying he wasn't?
I'm just saying that you get to a certain level, you get a nurse in the room when you're partying.
I'm wondering, because I know, Pascal, you've been involved in this. I'm sure you all have been involved in this in a while. And is there, what do you think is the proper use of something like the racial wealth gap? And maybe it could have multiple, but is there a place where it makes sense to like utilize this? Because I have the instinct that it is, but I have an issue with the way most people are going to interpret it.
I think that when making barometers of Black economic condition and comparing the conditions of Black people to other ethnic groups, the argument being said to demonstrate, particularly in the face of the subprime mortgage crisis, how Black people were particularly affected, it was wise to show where their position was. That was part of the legitimation for why you use racial wealth gap discourse. However, I believe that because it came about during a period where there was a cry for public goods governance, it was leaned into as a means to try to extract racial democracy or race-first politics in a period of time that had demonstrated that for 50 years of race-first politics, which is what we've had for 50 years, what we've gotten is an increase in the class differentiation between Black elites and Black poor. So I think it was a product of a misappropriation of energy on a problem that was caused by the subprime mortgage crisis that became a point of focus. Because let's make this clear: the Black elites like Darity or the people who are college proximate who are founding these reparations movements are being subsidized by foundations, by think tanks that are capitalized. And the reason they're capitalized to promote this type of thinking is because they know it does not challenge the status quo, because it allows the state and capital to dole out a racial democracy form of remedy for Black people that is going to be class skewed in a way that does not really solve the means of problems for the majority of Black people, because that's what we've been doing for the last 50 years anyway. So it's just a retreading of the whole hamster wheel over and over again. And the ruling class knows this. The people who control the means of production knows this. The foundations that finance this stuff knows this, and they're aware of it. And we're stuck in this cycle because socialist voices or dialectical materialist voices who are seeing this con will not be given the actual thoroughfare in media to make the analysis cogent that this is a hustle. It's a hustle that's being paid for with deep pockets, and people are being subsidized to push it because the last thing they want is a solidaristic, class-wide foundation of an economic program to challenge the way poverty is affecting people across the board. And whenever you hear people say things like, oh, class remedy don't work, well, we haven't had class remedy in 50 years for Black people. How well has that worked? We literally have not had any class politics since the Great Society. And what it has done is literally increase the gap between poor and working class Black people and Black elites.
Yeah. I really wouldn't be able to understand anyone who suggested that we've been trying all these class-based policies to improve things for Black folks, because outside of your suite of what remains of welfare programs, when you expand it to other things like go to college, go to Pell Grants, go to any of these other initiatives, they really don't care about class. Class isn't written into it. For example, very often the Pell Grant is considered a handout in a way to poor Black folks. When you look at the actual numbers coming out of the Pell Institute report or NCES, it's majority middle class folks who are getting the benefits of the Pell, because it's not strongly, it has no real class inflection. Most of these policies that I see that come out, it's always, in theory, somebody who's working class, bottom of working class, poor could benefit, but no extra effort is spent on it. And the only way people seem to be able to get these things passed, and I don't know if this is really true, maybe they're not trying other ways, it doesn't seem like they are, is if whatever's supposed to help the Black poor will have a large amount of resources that can go to Black middle and upper class, who ultimately get more effective at using the policy, like the Pell Grant, for example, than the Black poor ever were. So I just wouldn't understand how anyone could say we've had all these policies or things. Like, it doesn't feel like it's ever really been tried, or at least I'm just not seeing a ton of policies that are like, you know what, it's the Black poor who are really well off. They're the ones who are receiving the lopsided, shitty end of this distribution of incarceration, unemployment, concentrated poverty. So the policy we're going to come up with is going to be really targeted on them. And because we're thinking about, the real daily life of being Black and poor, and the, problems you're going to have getting to buildings, filling out forms, doing all this other stuff, we're going to add additional resources to simplifying that, or helping you along the way, or making sure that in addition to the Pell Grant, you're going to have a guidance counselor who helps you work through financial aid forms. Because I've actually looked up on Amazon, and there is no FAFSA how-to for poor folks. So it's just, every time I see any of these initiatives outside of, historical welfare, I'm not seeing anything that has like a real class awareness that's for Black folks.
Well, on that note, we will be heading into the bonus patron champagne room after hours. Bertrand, you'll be joining us for the bonus patron champagne room after hours?
Oh, I've got no life, man. I just sit around reading stats and being glad anytime someone who's like a second generation academic deigns to speak to me.
Well, you haven't seen this yet, but now in the bonus champagne room, the patron paywall, it's a call-in segment. So we'll be having people call in. Definitely, you've been a hit on this show, so I'm sure if people want to call in and ask you questions, they want to know, is that hair natural? Are the tips dyed? Don't answer it yet.
Oh,
wait for behind the paywall. They want to know what Pascal is wearing for the New York show. We told you.
Thanks for the invite to New York.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to invite to New York?
I told you some people are rude. Some people.
Not now.
Oh, here we go. M. Toussaint with the whole blah, 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 blah.
The hat is nice, but rudeness is unattractive.
Oh!
For real. I know.
You guys are mean. Someone, Carla Hernandez, is asking, does Bertrand like carne asada or chicken?
I feel like these are loaded. Like, I'm not hip to whatever. This feels like that, like elementary school or high school question.
I think it's a date night question by Carla Hernandez.
Well,
what kind of taco you prefer? That didn't sound right at all. But
hey.
I'm gonna walk away from this horrible taco joke that I didn't even try to make. I literally made that. Yes. But before we go, I made an intro video for today. I was not going to do one because I have walked away from the video essay, but I can't walk away from the intro video. This is the only way I could think to put a few of my favorite Black people in one video clip. Rick James and Arnold Drummond, a.k.a. Gary Coleman from Different Strokes. And also Jamal Khashoggi's Pop is in this. There's a lot of interesting folks in this clip. So thank you guys. And we're going to go out with
It has an indoor pool and jacuzzi, and there's horses and the tennis court. And my mom was there, you know, and she's getting older, and it's nice just to be around her, you know. I'm trying to buy the neighborhood up, really. It's a really nice area. It's about 25 minutes, 30 minutes from Buffalo. It's in the country, and it's a sanctuary for me. It really gives me a good balance on life, you know. It's a real nice place to be, to know that your roots are right next to you, and whatever you need them for strength, you go there. I have a family of 8. 4 boys, 4 girls. A very deep heartthrob of the ghetto.
In the age of diversity and inclusion, the United States celebrated its first Juneteenth as a national holiday. With all of the advancements of Black Americans since the civil rights movements of the 60s, there is still much discussion around the racial wealth gap. Is this a conversation that is actually beneficial for poor and working class Black Americans? Or is this a bourgeois project rooted in helping only a small section of Black elites? Is there value in these race-first policies? We'll ask these questions and more. This is Revolution.
Willis! I've been sitting here soaking and thinking.
Does that mean I can say, welcome aboard, son?
Yeah.
That was too much.
Yes, that was a lot.
All right. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. We'll see you in the champagne room. Patreon.com/Bitter Lake Presents. You guys got like 10 minutes to get there now. We are out.